Great Scott. It's issue 54 of the Steve and Cimino Says Boom Show. Steve, up, and
Oh.
away!
Hey everyone, welcome to Pop XP. And before the show starts, make sure to click that subscribe button and click the bell to get notifications when we go live and we upload awesome new content. And don't forget, if you can, make sure to share our stream on all your social media outlets. We appreciate it, and thanks for helping us grow the Pop XP channel.
Wow, John Cimino got some traps finally.
I think so.
What's up, everybody? This is issue 54 of the Steve and Cimino Says Boom Show. And today we have a special, it's very special day. But before we go into that, now tell us what's going on, big guy.
Oh, everyone knows the house rules. Look below, click that subscribe button, and smash that bell to get notifications when we go live and we upload some awesome new content like this episode tonight. And I got to tell you guys, I'm ready to jump in this, a little bit, maybe faster than a speeding bullet. I don't know. What do you say? What do you say?
Well, we got Brainiac down below. I'm thinking Mongol over here, maybe.
Okay. Yeah, I think so.
Fighting in the arena. The Toy Man, can I be the prankster? Can I be the prank? I gotta be some
sure,
lowly.
Yeah, you can put that little strange suit that he wears on. Sure, certainly.
But we have a special guest. But before we bring in our special guest, Steve, tell me the importance of this issue and this anniversary. Go ahead.
Well, we're dealing with really the Rosetta Stone of all superheroes. 85 years. Without this guy, there's nothing. There's no comic shops. There's no show. There's no us. There's nothing. It could have died on the vine. Okay. All those comic stores, all of that art, all of the lore that's being created stands on the shoulders of Superman. 85 years. In recent years, of course, Superman has found it harder and harder to gain an audience. We are going to get into that today, but we are going to be talking with Glenn Greenberg, who is being given the task of writing about Superman for an outside audience, not just the people like us in the know. He is actually writing something for the general populace to bring them in, give them some knowledge and some understanding. To do that, you have to be extremely knowledgeable on the history and character. You have to be very good at what you're doing. So I'm very happy to welcome back for the second time on this podcast, Mr. Glenn Greenberg.
And, I have to say, you can't get, thankfully, when I saw Glenn's special, his Time Magazine Superman special, I was happy to know that there was a guy writing that and putting that out there that knew what it was all about, that loved the character and was in the industry and knew all about. Because usually when you get those specials, you get like you don't know what you're gonna get.
No.
And I would like to show Niall. Maybe you can show this little thing. Me and Roy were in Kansas. Where were we? I think we were in the big Huntsville, Alabama show. And me and Roy went for a little walk. We went into a grocery store, and I looked, and I think I saw Glenn. And why? What happened? Show me. Can you show this little? Look at that. All this. And let me just say that I had to buy that for Roy. So he's like, I ain't buying this thing, and I'm like, well, I'm buying it. Only kidding. But it was great to see that. And it was good to see Superman on the shelves, like in the mainstream, because I'll tell you, we don't really see that anymore. And we'll get firsthand info from Glenn about that, the whole history of Superman's 85th anniversary. It was in April when Action Comics #1 was on the newsstands. And now on our newsstand, our virtual newsstand, we have Glenn Greenberg. Come on out here, Glenn, and give us a little soup de doop.
Oh,
Oh, he just landed.
yeah, just got back from
Yes, Glenn.
planet Krypton.
Glenn, thank you for coming back. This is Glenn part. This is Superman 2, which
Yes.
was a good one. It was Superman 2. First off, Glenn, thank you, and it's always a pleasure to have you and an honor. Tell us about this project. Tell us how it came to be, and tell us how you put it out there and all your history. Take us on this Superman tour and what the fans need to know about it.
Okay, well, I've been doing these bookazines for a while now. There you go. Thank you.
Oh.
A lot of these are tied into specific anniversaries. So, for example, I did one for John Lennon's his 80th birthday and Paul McCartney's 80th birthday and that kind of thing. So usually these things go either on the 0 or on the 5. Like, for example, I did one for Star Trek's 55th anniversary because they didn't do one for the 50th or whatever. So for Superman, the 85th anniversary was coming up. And my my regular editor, Bob Durr, floated this out to me amongst some other choices. And for me, it was no choice. It was like Superman. That's the one I want.
Yeah.
And the basic approach was I approached it the same way I would approach any of the other topics that I've written about. Whether it's Star Trek or Paul McCartney or John Lennon or whatever, is you sit down and hopefully you have some kind of working knowledge of the topic, which I've had a working knowledge of everything that I've written about. But you also have to sit down and do the research, because I am the first to admit I don't have an encyclopedic knowledge about something like Superman. I have a lot of knowledge, but facts, figures, months, years, all that kind of stuff, unless I experienced it personally, I got to do the research. I had a very superficial knowledge, so I just did a deep dive, going back to the backgrounds of Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster, how they came up with the idea, what their lives were like before they created Superman, what their backgrounds were. I knew the superficial facts about their problems with the company that eventually became DC Comics, that we know today is DC Comics. Back then they were called National. Where that schism first occurred and what caused the conflict that led to the lawsuit that basically led to Superman's creators being exiled from their character. So all of that, I did a deep dive with all of that. I also set out to interview all of the key people who have made a contribution to Superman that are still alive at this point. You know, I was very fortunate in that in 2017, I did an interview for Time with Richard Donner for the 80th anniversary of excuse me, for the 40th anniversary of Superman the movie. I did an interview with Richard Donner, so I was able to pull stuff from that. But I also sought out as many people who made key contributions to the character going back as far as I could. So that meant Jim Shooter. It meant Elliot Maggin, Mark Wolfman, all the way up to more recently Dan Jurgens, Mike Carlin, who in my book is one of the greatest Superman editors that have ever been. Just basically to cover all the main beats that, as you said before, Steve, this is not for the comic book diehard audience. This is for a mainstream primarily a mainstream audience, but it is for a comic book audience if you want to like relive all the highlights. If you want to,
Right.
if you want to, if there's certain aspects of the history that maybe you're not 100% sure of, you know, you'll get something out of it. But this is for as wide a possible audience, you know, as there can be, who want to know the general gist of this character, his history, and what he means to the world. So it was great getting these perspectives from all these comic book writers and editors. I also interviewed Ilya Salkind, who was the producer on the first 3 Superman movies, as well as Supergirl, the movie, and to get his perspective and what he felt he contributed to because it all feeds into the legend. I mean, at this point, Superman is such a popular culture force that you can't just silo it anymore. It's all Superman. So the movies, the comics, the animated series, the cartoon shorts, the radio show, it all feeds into the lore. And so, yeah, absolutely. I wanted to speak to Ilya Salkind. Elliot Maggin, who not only wrote the comic books, but he wrote 2 best-selling Superman novels. Last Son of Krypton and Miracle Monday. So he's got a perspective. Marv Wolfman has written novels featuring Superman. Roger Stern, I spoke to. So yeah, that's really how it all came together. Is once I got the assignment, it's one of those things where you just know you can write it in your head. Okay, this is what I have to do. This is who I have to speak to. This is how this how this book is going to break down. Something very similar happened when I wrote the Spider-Man book. For Time, I wrote a similar. I took a similar approach with Spider-Man, and that worked out really well. And that was kind of like the template for Superman with some differences. I do want to point out that this current book is not for Time, whereas my Spider-Man book was. This is for A360, so it's not a Time branded magazine. Although I'm working with the same editorial team. Oddly enough.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Come on.
Well,
Hope that answers your question.
Well, Glenn, let me first say that this is a time when Superman needed you or somebody like you, because one, you would do the book justice. That's a given, and plus knowing where to go, who to look for, what to write, what's needed for a mainstream audience, and we were talking earlier that it is kind of quite sad that we're coming into Superman's 85th, but he is not the strong symbol of hope that he used to be in the mass media anymore. And that's why I think this magazine is very important, because it's like just a punch in the face to a new audience that hasn't really given Superman as much as a chance. Because as I was telling you, just looking around, going to comic stores, just going to stores in general, you know, there really wasn't much that I could see. I'm like, usually Superman is everywhere, and I just do not see him like I used to see him back in the day, because it was Superman or bust. You got Spidey, you got Batman, but you always had Superman. And so, like, but now it's kind of not that anymore. It's funny when you see more of Rocket Raccoon in the stores and all that stuff, and then you see Superman, and it's really baffling. And so, once again, thankfully that you got to put that out there. And so, what is your feeling on all that stuff? Because once again, this book is more needed than you probably realize.
Well, one of the themes that I hit on in the book is somewhat what you're talking about is we do need Superman probably more than ever, and why is Superman not the great force in terms of influence in the media as he has been in the past? I mean, there's a lot of theories, and there's a lot. I think, you know, Dan Jurgens, when I spoke to him, and his quote is in the book, is, you know, Superman is who we want to be, but Batman is who we are. And I think that has something to do with it. I think that we're really angry right now, as a people, as a country. There's a lot of distrust between the two sides. There's a lot of anger and paranoia, and when there's this kind of negative feelings, it's much easier to gravitate towards somebody like Batman, who is angry, who is about vengeance, who is about, I see a problem, I'm going to smash it, I'm going to beat it to into submission, and it's very straightforward. That's easy to relate to. Batman is carrying this lifelong anger about what happened to his parents, and he's going to make anybody who is going to commit that kind of crime again, he's going to make them regret it. Superman, on the other hand, he's harder to relate to in the sense that he is a symbol of hope. He is a symbol of altruism. He is this person who believes and sees the good in everybody. And it's much harder to relate to that these days when, if a person belongs to another political party, then it doesn't matter which political party. You think of them less as a human being and more as like a thing, as something to ridicule, something to look down upon, as barely human. You categorize them. And with Superman, he sees the good in everybody. There's that line in the first movie where Jimmy says to Lois at the end, he goes, I think he really cares about you. And she says, who, Superman? Superman cares about everybody. And he does. And that's hard for a lot of people to relate to, especially now. And my argument is, and the problem is, excuse me, the problem is that the studios, and I think it's more a matter of the studios that produce the version of Superman that most people get to see. Let's face it. At this point, comic books is a very niche industry.
Very niche, yeah.
The comic books is the version of Superman that the least people see at this point. And so when you look to the people who make the movies, which is the studio, and I exclude Superman and Lois, the current TV show, from that because that doesn't really apply. They kind of have a good handle on Superman, but again, it's a very limited audience. The main audience for Superman at this point is the movies. And you've got either studio heads that don't believe in the character, or they're just happening to hire directors and writers who don't really believe in the character. Because let's just, and I make this point in the book. When the first Superman movie came out, we're talking 1978. It was in production from 1976 on. So America was coming out of a scandal-plagued presidency, a war that did not go the way we wanted it to. Does that sound familiar? This was 1976, okay, 77, when the first movie was being made. So what did they do? What did Richard Donner and Tom Mankiewicz do? They took the real world that we were living in, which was cynical, and we had our eyes opened that, yeah, the president of the United States could be a criminal, and we're not going to win every war we get involved in. It's going to be messy, and we may leave a foreign country with our tail between our legs. So that's the kind of world that's depicted in that movie. But Superman remains Superman. He is the bright light that is there to show us the way. And when he says with a straight face to Lois, I'm here to fight for truth, justice, and the American way, he believes it. And she laughs and says, you're going to be fighting every politician in this country. But he never wavers. That's why we love him.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And then so you fast forward to now, and you've got a Superman. And here's the funny thing. I thought Brandon Routh had the potential to be a great Superman. I thought Henry Cavill had the potential to be a great Superman. But in this world, when we need as much optimism and hope, there's that word again, hope, as possible, to see a Superman whose father says to him, I don't know, maybe you should have let that bus of kids die to protect your secret. And Superman and his mother saying to him, be their hero, Clark, or don't be their hero. You don't owe this world anything. What?
Yeah.
Or him telling Lois Superman never really existed. He was just a dream of, you stick around long enough and you become, nobody believes in you anymore. I'm paraphrasing, but stuff like that. I remember seeing Batman versus Superman in the theater, and I walked out. I'm not exaggerating. I'm being very, very literal here. I walked out of that movie depressed. I mean, utterly depressed. And I know this is not the popular thing to say, but I will say in favor of the Joss Whedon version of Justice League. That gave me a Superman I recognized. That gave me a Superman I wanted to see more of. And so to get back to your original question is why aren't we seeing Superman more these days? Because we haven't had a Superman we can really believe in a long time. I think is a big part of it, because the people who own Superman don't believe in him, and they can't even fake it. They can't even fake it. They'll allow one director to make him this basically a stalker who, whenever he it gets into his head, he'll just like go and spy on Lois Lane and her new boyfriend, or they'll just they'll get a guy who clearly does not understand Superman. And I interviewed Zack Snyder shortly before Batman versus Superman came out. I interviewed him. He's a nice guy. He's a likable guy. I tried to press him a little bit on the fact that, come on, you're not really a Superman fan. You're a Batman fan. Come on. And he insisted that he loved both characters equally. And from the words that came out after that, he proved that, no, that's not true. That he doesn't understand Superman. He never really did. And he never should have been given Superman in the first place. And that's going to probably get me in a lot of trouble with some of the people who are watching this. My book has already been slammed on Twitter because I didn't praise Zack Snyder to the stars as this great, visionary for Superman. I just think he was the wrong guy. And I think that the last 3 or 4 movies that featured Superman, we're talking Superman Returns, Man of Steel, Batman versus Superman, and yeah, even Justice League, because it wasn't a success. They did a lot of damage to that brand. And I think that right now, like I said, the Superman and Lois TV show, although I have a lot of problems with it, I think they at least get Superman right. But if you've seen the ratings, I'm one of the very few people who's probably watching it.
Yeah, I'm probably with you.
So I hope that at least begins to answer my impressions of where the character is right now.
Go ahead, Steve.
It's quite fascinating about some of the Pandora's boxes that you've just opened in that last 5 minutes. I'm not a Superman fan, never have been in the comics. However, Superman Man of Steel is one of my favorite superhero films of all time. So again, maybe that was the audience that they were going for. Maybe they were going for an audience that weren't pure 100% Superman fans. And the reason I know this is because I was driving in the car with someone on a way to a convention, and we were having an argument. The argument got so heated that he almost drove off the road because he couldn't accept, that his version of Superman was not appearing. And by the way, I'm being deadly serious. We were completely off the freeway, and then I was like, we're going to die over a Superman, conversation here. And his main problem was that Superman would not have allowed all that destruction and would not have killed, would not have snapped the guy's neck, General Zod.
You're right. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But for me, I love the film because obviously for me, I'm like, there's certain things that Superman did in the comics and even in the first couple of films where I'm like, okay, all right, I'm not really into that. But I understand 100% how someone who is a Superman fan all the way and is up to their neck in the lore and the way Superman should be acting, that film goes outside some of it. So anyway, I just wanted to put that there. I also have an idea about why people aren't connecting with the character today. And I think it comes back, this is going to be interesting to get your perspective on, Glenn. People of a young age aren't reading comics anymore. So if you're showcasing a youngster, let's say they're breaking into reading, they're 7 or 8. Most 7 or 8-year-olds, they aren't angry, they're not bitter, they're not twisted, and they can be impressed by, just the sheer superpowers of it, the costume, the characters, the origin. Then they can go outside, they can put the cape on and run around and play. I'm Superman. That is missing. That doesn't happen anymore because those younger generation of kids, they're not reading that. They're either playing some sort of weird video game or whatever it is. So by the time that a teenager, 14, 15, 16, may come across a comic, they're already bitter and twisted. I'm sorry, but that's the way the world is right now. We have bitter 14, 15, and 16-year-olds who've gone through the school system and have been taught to hate everything about America. So when they see a character flying around with this symbol, and truth, justice, and America way, they're like, oh, I'm out of this book. I'm out. So I think the combination of no youngsters reading Superman stories and then coming along, with the character and growing up with it like they did in the old days, that's the reason why sales on Superman are low. It's not, all over the place. And certain other characters, which are definitely darker, with their sarcastic humor, and they do things that Superman would never do, but they appeal to this audience that are like, don't give me that truth, justice, and America way. I want Wolverine to pop his claws through that guy's head. Those people are never going to gravitate towards Superman. To get Superman, you have to capture the youth very young. They have to be introduced. The only odd thing is about my little theory is that we've had the Superman cartoons, the Superman animated series for a long time. Mm-hmm. And youngsters have been seeing that and still not gravitating toward it. So that I'm not 100% certain, but I'm just wondering about how you feel about that, Glenn.
Well, all I can tell you is, I mean, that's a much more global problem that you've outlined, which is kids aren't reading comics, period. So, I mean, that affects the entire industry, of which Superman is just one small part. And that's a very valid point. Kids aren't reading comics, for the most part. I occasionally see kids coming in with their parents to the comic book store that I shop at regularly. For the most part, they're not buying the comics, though. They're buying actual what are they children's books, like picture books and stuff like that, but not the comics. So that's one thing. The other thing is, all I can tell you is, with regards to Superman, my personal experience was I was not a Superman kid growing up. I was a Batman kid and the Hulk. Okay. The two characters that are driven by anger. Okay. It says that might say something a lot about me. I'm not sure, but I found Superman in all incarnations that were available to me as a kid. I found him boring, whether it was the George Reeves TV show, the cartoons, and the comic books. I really appreciate Kurt Swan's artwork now. I see him as the master storyteller that he was. But as a kid, I would see these great covers by Neil Adams or Dick Giordano and Rich Buckler, where Superman is young and vital and he's doing something really action-packed. And then you open the book and he looks like he's like 45 years old. And,
Exactly.
Again, no offense to Kurt. I didn't appreciate it then. I appreciate it now. Okay. So my collection of Superman comics was very, very sparse when I was a kid. It wasn't until, number one, the first movie with Christopher Reeve, where my reaction was, oh my God, if Superman was like this in the comics, I'd be reading the comic books. Okay. So I was around 9 during that time. When John Byrne came in and redid Superman, I was 16 at that point. Okay. that kept me reading Superman on a regular basis for 20 years. Okay. We're talking after Byrne left and for the 18 years that basically followed. I was a diehard Superman fan. Why? Because number one, they gave me the Superman, the approach to Superman that I wanted, which was more grounded, more who he is as a character, how these stories that he's in affect him. He can be defeated, he can be hurt, he's not all powerful, he can't push planets out of their orbit, he has to struggle. Okay, his relationship with the people around him were more realistic. He had real problems, and on top of that, they had who was arguably the best guy working in comics at that point on that book. Okay. John Byrne on Superman, I want to see what he does. Okay. And the fact is, and on top of all that, I found it to be so good, and he laid such a strong foundation that even after he left, they stuck with what he had established, and the momentum was just so strong that they just kept going. I mean, it was, they just had to pick up where he left off and just keep on going. So that was the combination for me. It was the approach and the quality. Now, I can't speak to the quality of Superman over the last few years because I haven't read the book regularly since before the New 52. Before the New 52 started, which I'm thinking is what, about 11 years ago, around 10 years, 12 years ago. So I only know superficially what they've been doing lately. None of it has been enough to get me to come back. So all I can tell you is that was the combination that worked for me. I think a lot of it has to do with it, and it's something that Jim Shooter has always said throughout his career, is it all begins with great stories. You tell great stories and you build from there. It may take a little while, but it has to start with great stories. And I haven't heard anything lately about Superman where, oh my God, they've got the best writers and the best artists in the industry working on this character, and the stories are just amazing. I haven't heard it. If I'd heard it, I would check it out.
You haven't heard that with many titles, not just Superman today.
That's
but Glenn, I just want you to know, I just want you to know before I give it to Niall, our patterns are so aligned. I was Hulk, Batman, and Spider-Man. Mm-hmm. I never liked Superman. I hated Kurt Swan because he looked like those old-time wrestlers from the 50s, and he had the blocky waist, you know. I mean, he didn't have like a V shape. He had the thick waist, and I was like, he looks like Steve Reeves. But then Christopher Reeves is he was so impactful to me, and all of a sudden I loved. It was like I fell in love with this guy because I fell in love with Christopher Reeves, and that guy looked like Superman. He acted like Superman. Mm-hmm. And then you just said the next thing too. I never read. I was a pure Marvel zombie, but I remember looking at John Byrne when he drew Superman, and I looked at that because he only drew. If you know anything, obviously you know the Hulk. Remember his Hulk run? He was only there for 6 issues, and I wanted him to stay, and then he was gone. Mm-hmm. And then you see him on Superman. Yep. And I was like, Superman looks pretty cool. Like, you know, I mean, like he made him with the like I said, the V taper and but it just looked so good. But once again, I didn't stick with it or anything like that. But I just remember looking at it and I said to myself, that's the way Superman should look and stuff. So as you know, Jurgens came in there, you know, like I said, I was a pro Marvel guy. I didn't, you know, even Batman, I liked him from a distance, you know, it was tough love. But but for my problem is Superman was still always there. Like I liked when you went to a toy store or wherever you always wanted to, they were all my friends and you wanted to see, and Superman was just the guy that was always there. Like, and you're like, yeah, that's the big guy over there. Mm-hmm. That's what I don't see anymore. So like, that's what it makes me sad, but it's just funny, our patterns right there. You read those comics though. I couldn't go near them. That's sacrilege.
Right.
Yeah. Well, you know, for me, I have to say, you know, I am a Superman fan. That was one of my first loves in comics was Superman. And I started getting the books, in the late 80s, and then the Ruby Spears Superman cartoon, which came out in 88, which,
88.
wasn't the most successful, but
Right.
I think it ran for about a season, maybe even not a
Mhm.
full season, but it brought into, for me at what's that, 4 years old, I started seeing this crazy, this guy in blue and red, and now I'm seeing him in action. I'm seeing the powers. I'm seeing what he's capable of.
Mhm.
And then obviously being introduced to the movies, on VHS at the time, because obviously they were long in theaters, before me. But it to me, Superman is a symbol of hope,
Mhm.
and it actually bothers me that they can't figure him out now, that they can't get a good team writing him. I will say, I do follow some of the newer books. I don't read them, but I'll peruse just to see. Art wise, they've got some amazing artists on this book. They may not be household names, but the artists that they're bringing in are doing an excellent job. And I'll say this: mainstream comics, the art is great.
Mm.
A lot of the art is fantastic. Unfortunately, the dialogue and the stories really, to me, don't hold a candle to a lot of the art in the books. But I have twin 4-year-old boys, and obviously as a comic book guy, and I have my studios and stuff, and they see everything, so I'm not grooming them, but they get exposed to stuff.
Right.
And one of my boys, who's a little rough and tough and dark, he naturally gravitated towards Batman. Then my more lighthearted son, who's pretty happy, loves everyone, this and that, really gravitated towards Superman naturally on their own. I didn't throw it in front of them.
Yeah.
They'd come into my studio and they'd look at the statues, they'd look at the art, they'd see the books, and they both separately gravitated to it. So then at that point, you see interest, right? So I introduced them to the cartoons. My wife doesn't really like that I do that, but I introduced them to all the old cartoons, all the stuff, and they love it. So there is hope. Like Steve
Mhm.
was saying, you get them at a young age. There
Mhm.
is hope that if you get the stuff in front of them, they do become interested and they want to explore it. And next thing you know, they want to live in their Superman costume. They're carrying their Superman 12-inch figure around with them. They want to know more about them. And as they get older, I'll let them go through the comics and stuff. But to me, in comics right now, and as you described, the world is just hate. There's so much hate in the world right now. Everyone's angry. But if to me, it's like you utilize a character like Superman,
Yeah.
a symbol of hope, a man with superpowers that honestly really is, technically the guy is practically invincible.
Mhm.
They had to bring him down because he was too powerful.
Right.
But he could be the perfect symbol if into the right hands of writers. I think there's plenty of great artists that can do justice. I think they should actually bring, Dan Jurgens. I think if they brought some of these guys back, the Macy sales go up because they knew how to work the character. But they could literally use Superman to maybe even unify some of the comic book community because that's what he does, right?
Mhm.
He is the symbol of hope. He takes the negative side, he takes the positive side. He was always to bring those. He always brought those negative worlds together, and now he's almost looked at as a negative character of what he
Glenn, before you
represents.
before you answer, I just want to say the next bastion I thought of Superman that came that I really noticed after John Burns. Like I said, I was just pure marvel. I have to say, Paul Dini and Bruce Timm
Oh
with
yeah.
those cartoons, especially Justice League Unlimited, that shows you when you write those heroes correctly and good. I don't know if you guys saw those cartoons, but that's what
Oh
I grew
gosh,
my
I still watch. I still
Oh, they're
watch them.
terrific. They're
that's what I
terrific.
grew. That's what
That's
I grew
what
my daughter.
creators who actually love the characters, respect the characters, give you Batman the Animated Series, Superman the
Well,
Animated
let
Series,
me let
Justice
me
League.
let me say, I mean,
This is my daughter's. Just so you know, this is my daughter's toy. That's how
one
into it she was.
one of the theses that I went into writing this book was one of the points I was going to make, and I feel like I made it, is that Superman is always at his best, no matter what media he's in. He's always at his best when the people working on him truly love him and care about him. And it was very gratifying to me when I interviewed one of the other people. I neglected to mention him earlier. One of the other people I interviewed for this book, and we had a great conversation, was Mark Wade. And Mark Wade said literally during the interview, well, Superman's always at his best when the people who are working on him actually do love him. And I was like, oh, good, good. It's I'm not the only one who seems to see that. is you can't put him in the hands of just somebody who sees him as IP, and just a piece of, intellectual property that you can just kind of drop into a movie and everything's going to fall into place. You have to understand the character, because we're getting to a point, I think we may already be at the point where the audience understands the character a lot better than a lot of the people who are actually working on the character. And so, it kind of is kind of baffling that at no point during the making of Superman Returns, nobody said to the director, Superman is like acting like a stalker, and he's eavesdropping on people and listening in on private conversations and using his X-ray vision in a really unsavory way and basically breaking into houses, No, and the funny thing is, and this is something that I learned while I was working on the book. I did not know this, but DC Comics controlled all aspects of Superman in other media. So, for example, the radio show was overseen by DC Comics. The guy who was editing Superman, the comic books, oversaw the radio show. Same guy oversaw the George Reeves TV show. He was eventually elevated to, I guess, editor-in-chief of DC. I don't think he had that title, but his name was Whitney Ellsworth. And he went out to California and he oversaw the TV show. And at the beginning of each season, he would fly out the new Superman comic book editor, Mort Weisinger. I'm sure you've heard that name.
Yes.
And they would sit down and they would break down the stories for each of the episodes and feed these outlines to the writers. DC controlled the projects, the TV show, the radio show,
the Filmation cartoons. The Filmation, those
Yep.
Aquaman cartoons. Those were written. Those cartoons were written by other comic writers.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what happens is, you get to the point where I think, over the last 20 to 25 years, I mean, my understanding was that was the case with like the Lois and Clark TV show of the 90s, the one with Dean Cain and Terry Hatcher, that Paul Levitz could weigh in. He could basically veto something if it was really intrinsically wrong, but DC wasn't calling the shots anymore at that point. I mean, this was the studio guys were calling the shots on their version of Superman. So you get stuff like Stalker Superman, and Superman Returns. And I think that is a problem because you've got people who don't understand the character basically calling the shots. And for me, the most natural thing in the world would be, well, we want to do a Superman movie. We want to be true to the character. Get Bruce Timm and Paul Dini involved in some way. But because it's Hollywood, those are animation guys. No. We're all siloed here. We can't let animation guys come in and deal with live action. That's not done. The same way that why wouldn't you bring in some of the biggest names from the comic books to come in and do more than just pick their brains for ideas? Have them do passes on the scripts. Have them weigh in every step of the way. If you don't want them to write the scripts, okay, but give them more say in the process, because that's where you're going to get the character done right. I mean, one of the biggest criticisms about Superman Returns was Stalker Superman, and that didn't have to be there. That's what a lot of people remember that movie as. That didn't have to be there.
Yeah. Well, just really quick, Steve, before I give it to you, once again, Paul Dini, Bruce Timm, Justice League Unlimited. That is one of the greatest superhero anything ever made. I mean, you can watch that today. Even the other ones are great. I love Batman, the MMA series, all that stuff. But Justice League Unlimited is so unbelievable. Like, it's still fresh today. I love it. Go ahead, Steve.
And it's not just them. It's also the other writers that were involved. You had Dwayne McDuffie, comic book writer. J.M. DeMatteis, comic book writer.
Really quick. When I talked before he passed away, I think a few years before he passed away, I talked to Dwayne McDuffie,
Mhm.
And I talked to him at a convention, and I asked him exactly, I said, how come you guys are making those cartoons so good and it's not that good on the comics? And he told me this, I'll never forget. This was like 2007. He
Okay.
said, because they let me write them the way I want to write them. He had no pushback. So I guess at that time in the comics, maybe there was more editorial, because obviously maybe stories and all that stuff. But he said he got to write Superman and those characters the way he wanted to, and he didn't have any pushback. I remember him telling me that specifically. So that's why you got a comic book guy in that animation field, and you got one of the best cartoons ever. Go ahead, Steve.
Well, Glenn, I think that you really hit the nail on the head in regards to the arrogance of people who work in Hollywood, and also the fact that there's a clique and they won't allow anyone else into that clique.
Mhm.
I was privy to quite an amazing situation back in the early 1990s. I had a little scrape with Hollywood. I knew a person that was a film producer, and he was working hand in hand with Constantine Films. And he had the rights to the Silver Surfer, believe it or not. And word got around that I knew what I was talking about, and that I knew, what, who, what, why, and then. And so this guy comes up to me and says, hey, everyone tells me that you know your stuff, right? He goes, I don't have anyone on my staff that knows anything about this character. I want you to meet my main script reader, just so you can talk with him a little bit.
Wow.
And I was fairly new in America, and I was like, wow, this is magnificent. Okay, I'm going to go and see it. So we went over there, and there was a large house, and everyone was sitting around there, and I met the main script reader for this person. And he came out, and he was smashed out of his brain on booze, and he basically sat behind this thing, and and he was like, all right, man, pitch me this surfer thing. What is this?
Oh, wow.
So I'm explaining about the origin of the surfer, his name, and the planet, and how he comes to Earth, and Galactus. And as soon as I said Galactus, the guy just went like this. He was just like, he poured the whiskey, and he was like, that funny cartoon stuff isn't going to work. I deal in the real world. I deal with multiple millions and millions of dollars, and we don't, this world that you're talking about, Sip is, and so I went in there as like, hey, and then he just drained the life. He was like the most toxic person that I had ever seen in my life. So I left that little meeting, and it didn't go any further than that. Years later, I had another experience, which is, I don't know what this is. I was at a convention, and John had someone come up to his booth, and this was the guy that was working on the Fantastic Four film, Rise of the Silver Surfer, whatever it was called.
Okay.
So John says, hey, the writer's here. This is Steve, this is the writer for the new Surfer film, which of course hadn't come out yet or anything. So I'm standing behind my booth, and I was like, oh, I said, what source material did you read when it comes to the origin of the Surfer? Did you just take it from the Kirby, or did you read the Stan and John Buscema? He looked at me like I was like a slug, like a single-celled amoeba. Like, I don't know what you're talking about. I said, you've never heard of Zen La? You've never heard of Norrin Rad? And he didn't know who Norrin Rad was. So it fits perfectly with what you said, Glenn, about this arrogance level. Whereas before, the DC Comics had some sway, and they were able to get in some people in there that knew what they were talking about. But these days, you have people working in these franchises in, Hollywood and the studios that are so in their little bubble, and they have their little friends. They have their little clique. So they'll say, okay, my friend who worked on Law and Order, he can do this superhero thing. Okay? He's a good buddy of mine. He did some script writing for Law and Order. That person hasn't got an idea what they're doing, and therefore you get Stalker Superman. And I really think that you hit it perfectly on the head right there, and you probably answered a lot of people's questions about the old days compared to the new days. I really appreciate you bring that little nugget out.
Well, I mean, like I said, the problem is that it's that we're getting to the point where the audience knows the characters better than the people who own the characters, and it is unfortunate, and a lot of it. See, the thing is after the other thing is that Hollywood, and I don't want to turn this to a Hollywood bashing session, but it's just so damn easy. Um, you know, when the Green Lantern movie came out, and I got to see it at a press screening, like before an advance screening before it came out, because I was working for a magazine at the time, and I walked out. And I'm like, what a piece of crap! Just what? And I wrote a review on my blog at the time, and I outlined everything that was wrong with this movie. Okay, it felt like it was a bunch of ideas thrown into a Cuisinart. It was done by committee. It had no point of view. It had no real direction. There was no sense of a million things. What does Warner Brothers take away from it? Well, the Dark Knight movies did great, and Green Lantern didn't. The Dark Knight movies are really dark and grim and gritty, and Green Lantern was lighthearted and fun. So that kind of movie doesn't sell. Now we've got to make all the superhero movies more like the Dark Knight movies. That was their takeaway. Not the fact that they made a piece of crap, but that it wasn't dark like Batman. Well, no, Green Lantern shouldn't be dark like Batman. Superman shouldn't be dark like Batman. So when the rights to Superman, because this is what really happened here, is if Warner Brothers did not get a Superman movie in the works by 2011, they stood to lose the film rights to Superman. Because of the whole public domain laws and all that kinds of copyright laws. They had to announce and get into pre-production a Superman movie by 2011, or they stood to lose the rights. Okay. So they had to scramble. And again, they looked to the movies that worked, which were the Christopher Nolan Batman movies. And so they asked him, can you do Superman too, as well? And he's like, no, I'm busy with Batman. We'll get somebody else, but I'll produce it. And okay, well, to a certain degree, it makes sense, but you don't want that mentality that's going into those Batman movies into a Superman movie. And how they got Zack Snyder, I couldn't tell you exactly how Zack Snyder entered the picture. I think some of it probably had to do with the fact that he had directed Watchmen, so he had that background doing Superman stories.
That's right, the Watchmen.
But because he also did like this deconstructionist, realism, dark, gritty superhero take with Watchmen, that put him in line with, Christopher Nolan's approach, and put him in line with what the studio wanted to do, which is dark and gritty. No matter who the superhero is, we got to follow that Batman template. And so I think to a certain extent, Zack Snyder made perfect sense to them. We saw the results. Now, Steve, I completely understand why that. I understand that you like Man of Steel, and I can understand why. Because you know what? From a visual level, it's a beautiful movie. Mm-hmm. It's a beautiful looking movie. It's an action-packed movie. It achieves the potential that a Superman movie should have on most levels. There were 2 or 3 fundamental problems that I had with it. Mostly in the writing. Okay. And so I don't disagree with you. And I don't say you're wrong to like Man of Steel. I understand why you like Man of Steel. I like a lot of Man of Steel. But boy, that could have been a great movie. If people from DC had been involved in the approval process more, and were able to say, guys, no, let's sit down. Let's talk about what you want to accomplish here in this story, and let's see if we can get to there while being faithful and true to the Superman character and the mythos. So you want to see a lot of destruction in Metropolis as a result of this fight between him and Zod. We have to show that Superman is trying his best to get the fight away from the city. He just can't do it. Zod won't let him. Zod keeps bringing the fight back. Okay? Right there. We just solved the story problem. You know, the whole death of Jonathan Kent. Let's talk about that. Let's make it so that Superman doesn't stand there impotent while his father's like, no, make your mother a widow. You know, that kind of thing. And with regard to the death of the killing of General Zod, again, that's something that I would have wanted DC to have more of a role in that conversation and come up with a solution that gives the filmmakers what they want, but is also truer to the Superman mythos. And those are the only key areas that I really have a problem with that movie.
That's really fascinating, Glenn, because my favorite scene in Superman Man of Steel is that part where his father is going to die. Because the whole sequence is basically, why isn't this tenacious reporter going to blow this story through everywhere? She's just found the biggest story in the world. Okay, she's going to be able to write her ticket. Okay, because they basically plugged her as this plucky reporter that's getting it done where no one else can. So that scene, when I first saw it, had an amazing amount of emotional impact for me, because Uncle Kent basically had trained the young Superman so much into thinking that the world would never accept him and it would be a disaster. The whole world was going to end as soon as they found out who he was, that he was just, he'd had this in his head. He'd had it in his head. And so when the storm's coming and Kevin Costner standing outside the car, and then Superman goes like this, and then Kevin Costner just does this. I mean, I remember I was like, God's sakes, this is a tough scene. Okay, so I'm getting your point of view where you're going, oh, come on now, he just let his father die, but for me, it was the Superman's was willing to sacrifice someone from his family to keep the world calm and safe, because he just did not believe it. So again, believe you me, I get a lot of stick. Because I'm a Marvel man and I love that film. And people, they're like, yes, they got froth coming out of their mouth when they're speaking to me on that. But I found it, fascinating that you bring up that scene. I just wanted to give you my perspective on it.
And I respect it. I'm almost afraid to ask what you think of Batman versus Superman.
Wait a second. I can make you both happy. You want to make that a better movie for both of us that we'll all love? Give him red hair, change the name to Sun God, the Hyperion story, and then give him that new costume. And I bet you we all love it. I would.
That's a valid point. That's a very valid point.
But
Let me put it this way. I didn't walk out of Man of Steel in a state of depression. I did with Batman v Superman.
Yes. Well, again, I think even I have my limits. Okay, I'm not a DC guy, but I know rules. I know rules and law. And so when you see the scene where Batman's lifting weights and training, and I'm thinking, I don't care how much you train. I don't care what are you doing here? What is this scene? And all of us here, all four of us could basically know, all right, Superman and Batman are going to fight. Oh dear, 1 minute's gone and Batman's a broken piece of bones on the floor. Okay? We know that, and so they had to create this whole story and they completely messed it up. So when I left that film, I was like, oh, all right, he says a name and Superman backs off and la la la. So I'm in agreement with you on that one, Glenn. That was when I left that film, I was like, oh, I'm fearful. I'm fearful for this franchise now.
Steve,
I totally was.
Steve, you didn't like the CGI muscles on Ben Affleck? You didn't like those? You didn't? I was like, get out of here.
Again, going back to Glenn's point, if they had someone from the comics and the script writers there on the scene, they're going to film, like, oh, this script looks pretty good. And then someone says, Dan Jurgens is there and says, it doesn't matter how many chains that Batman's lifting and pushing and pulling. He's fighting Superman. Let's find a way where we can use kryptonite, we can use science, we can use all this other stuff. But he's not going to be standing there like this against Superman. Sorry.
there is a laziness in the writing outside of and it bothers me. It's not just on the DC films. It's on some of the Marvel stuff too. And I remember the hoops that we had to jump through when I was writing for Marvel, when I was editing for Marvel. The hoops that I had to jump through as a writer, because I had tough, good editors who would pound into me. No, you have to think all this stuff through. You know, if you do this, then here are the repercussions. So you got to factor that in, and all this kind of stuff. And I would do that to my writers as well. And you know, for the crap pay that we were making, you know, and when I think of how much these writers in Hollywood probably are making and getting away with stuff that we never could get away with, you know, for the comics, because our standards were higher, you know.
Yes.
And that drives me crazy. Well, whether it's a DC movie or a Marvel movie or TV series, when I see weak writing of these characters that I love, and I know how tough, you know, you know, the tough editors were on me, and how tough I was as an editor on writers to get it right, because we wanted the stories to be great. And there's a laziness and just a lack of understanding that I see. I don't want to belabor the point. I'd much rather be just talking about what makes Superman great.
Well, well, that's what we'll do. Like, since we're coming to an end here on Superman's 85th, that's what we should do. Yeah, we see the problems on this, but let's talk about something good about Superman. Like what will it take to get that symbol painted on walls again? Painted, like, you know, see what do you think it's going to take to get Superman back? Like maybe when he hits his 90th or his 100th birthday, Superman's back on top, and you got an old Glenn doing the new thing, and you said,
well, Glenn looks like he's going to go on forever. He's not going to be old at the 100th. The guy's going to go forever.
But what is tell us what Superman means, and what does the world need to understand that's going to make Superman the greatest superhero of all, because everything is based around him.
At his best, he is an aspirational character. You can't be Superman, but you can aspire to be what he espouses, what he represents. He should. I mean, there's that great line from the first movie that Marlon Brando says to the baby is, "There are great people, Kal-El. They wish to be. They only need a light to guide them, to guide the way. And for that, I've sent them you." And that makes him sort of like a Jesus figure.
Moses.
And a Moses figure, because he's being sent down the river from certain doom.
Yeah.
The problem is, I mean, you've got Jesus, and not a lot of people live up to his principles either. You know what I mean? People who are dyed in the wool Jesus, followers, and they don't walk the walk or talk the talk. But anyway, I think that what makes Superman great, and what should make him great, is that he's who we should aspire to be. We can never get there, but we should at least aspire. We should at least follow the model that he sets. Believe that there is good, maybe not in everybody, but try to find the good. Try to see the good in your enemies. And yeah.
Another thing, it reminded me when I remember reading an interview with Alex Ross, and I guess the first Superman he painted was that hardcover, that paperback. It was that hardcover book. It was a novel on Superman, and he had to draw Superman with the
ponytail.
With the ponytail.
Okay.
And he was so mad about that, because he said Superman is a man out of time. He doesn't change. Right. He's always standing to his virtues, his symbol, like who he is. He doesn't change fashions. He won't get the long hair. He won't get the beard. He'll always stay the same, no matter you see him in the 1930s. And I love that, because it's so true. And that's what's great, because it doesn't matter what these crazy humans are doing. They're now polarizing and all that stuff. I'm still going to be who I was what I always aspired to be, like, and I never change. He never wavers that. And that's Superman. When they say Man of Steel, it's like steel consequence, like his steel virtues. That's what I also think is he has those strong, super hard virtues that just doesn't change because he'll help that cat. He'll, from the tree, he'll fly, he'll change the course of mighty rivers, but yet he'll also pick a flower and fly it to low, whatever, like and have that Kansas thing, be that farm boy from Kansas. And it doesn't matter what trends come, gothic, hip hop, your synth. I don't know that Steve's leather and all that stuff, his ABBA, his synthesizers, but he just does not change. And that's what I think is what's magical about Superman. He always stands as that symbol of hope, but because he doesn't waver. It doesn't matter what you're doing and you're doing. I'm gonna be who I am, and I'm gonna try to bring love and peace to the world. That's how I think.
Well, one of the other key things is I'm not saying that you can't do a dark story with Superman in it, or a modern, with modern day storytelling sensibilities. What I am saying is Superman should not be dragged down into that darkness and those kinds of sensibilities.
Exactly.
He has to be the light. And all you have to do is look at any of the stories that Alan Moore wrote featuring Superman, which were the most sophisticated Superman stories of the day. Very modern, what Alan Moore did to the comic book medium was just remarkable. The level of storytelling and the sophistication that he brought to the medium. But you read the Superman stories, some of them were pretty damn dark. But Superman was recognizable as Superman. He never got dragged. He was always the light in that story. And the problem that I have in some of the other treatments is that Superman's been allowed to be pulled down into the darkness, and that he's
unwavering.
And unsure and uncertain about who he is and what his mission is. That's bullshit to me. That's not who Superman is. Now I can't tar the comic books with that criticism because like I said before, I haven't read the comic books in years, so I'm not commenting on them, okay? Because I don't know what's being done in the comics now, except on the most superficial of levels. I know that he's got a teenage son, I think, and he and Lois are still married and all that. I don't know what the quality of the stories are or anything like that. I'm just not hearing a lot of buzz about them that makes me want to run and pick up a new Superman comic. So I just want to make that abundantly clear. I'm not criticizing the comics because I'm ignorant to really what's going on in them. I'm talking about the other, how Superman is perceived and being portrayed in the mass media.
I think you probably helped yourself by not taking a look at some of the modern stuff.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask you, Steve. What since you're in the comic book store, one of the most popular comic book stores in the world, you get the traffic. What's the census on Superman?
It goes into something that you've both been talking about this last 5 minutes, and about having the character elevated to a certain level, or as Glenn says, dragging the character down to another level, a certain level. So what we have, and I'm sure that Niall knows this story. I'm sure he does, because he's probably sweating right now that I'm going to talk about it.
I want to hear this.
I have a feeling I know exactly where you're going.
There's a story out there where, for some strange reason, Superman has no real powers, and so he's captured and he's being tortured. Okay. And he is being abused with this long pipe.
What?
Yes, he is basically being anally raped with this pipe, and you see it in silhouette, and he's basically helpless, and you can see him in silhouette, and for months, I think it's months long, someone is coming and shoving this pipe up him. And
is this
when
real?
I saw it, I thought to myself, who in the world would allow this great character of all of these years old to be abused like that? Who is the editor that's in charge of allowing a writer to say, hey, I don't really know much about Superman. I don't want to write about Krypton or stuff like that, but I have an idea about power and inner anger. So I want to do a story where he's raped. And instead of the editor saying to that person, pack up your bags and please leave the office, he's like, this sounds like a great idea for a story. It's one of the saddest things that I ever saw. I immediately felt sorry for fans of DC Comics. I felt sorry for fans of Superman. But Glenn, if all you have to do is do a little search on it, and if you see it, you'll probably have a tear coming to your eye. It's one of the saddest things that's happened in the last 40 years worth of comic stories. It's just literally abysmal, horrific.
That's terrible. That's terrible.
I'm glad that I haven't been aware of that. And boy, I don't know if I would have put that in my book.
Oh my God.
I don't know. I might have skipped over that one anyway. Wow.
That's a power trip. That's a power trip. You know, those activists over there that they just said, you know what? Let's let this guy who's been on top for so long, let's degrade him.
Also, John, it's also a question of
that's terrible. Terrible.
Knowing a man has to know his limitations, as Clint Eastwood used to say.
Mm-hmm.
So if I got a knock on the door right now and two DC executives walked in there and they had a briefcase and said, Steve, $50,000 check in here.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to give you, come back in a couple of weeks with what you want to do with Superman. We're going to do it for you. I couldn't do it. I'm not in that mode.
Mm-hmm.
Now, what I could do was take the check and do something un-Superman-ish and hope the editor would go with me on it.
Mm-hmm.
But I know that a fan that opening up the book and goes, I've been reading Superman since 1973. And they opened it up and they saw my name and they're like, I wonder if this guy knew what Superman. I don't like any of this, but I got the check.
Mm-hmm.
I'm getting the check.
Mm-hmm.
So again,
Jeez.
if you know that you're not qualified to write a character, and by the way, I think this goes through the entire industry, you have to have the fortitude and the strength to say, I'm not going to write this character because I can't give the character justice. Hence, we have that story because that writer has no love for the character.
Right. Mm-hmm.
There's barely any love for any of the characters anymore, save a few. But like I never knew that either, Glenn. I'm just as in shock as you are.
Yeah, that was in like 2021.
Yes.
Oh,
Not recently.
Like that recently, yeah. Yeah, that they did that, and then obviously they did Superman, was it Son of Kal-El, where his son took over the mantle, and
I did hear
they did
about
a
that.
story where he was bisexual and everything like that. But
Yeah, I heard that.
and that's kind of like the biggest news of Superman in the past few years. Besides that, I mean, the books aren't exciting. They just don't know how to write for him. And that's where I think it just falls onto the knowing the character, writing the character. But I do think, and we all know it, I just think, the current political demographics right now make it hard for a character that's so symbolic, truth, justice, American way, and that was a big controversy too. They took the American way out.
But how do you explain the popularity? How do you explain the popularity of Chris Evans as Captain America?
Yeah.
He's
got a great butt, according to women.
That is a wonderful point because basically Captain America is basically Marvel's Superman in the way he is this standard, unshakable. Okay,
yes.
All this terrible stuff is going on around him. He's like, no, I'm not going to kill this guy. The police and the law, Again, it's a really, really great.
But they're not doing anything with him anymore. That Endgame, that was it. Where's Captain America now?
Well, that's I mean, like that's like you get into logistics of the actor has a contract. I don't want to pay him probably how much, but I'm talking about just in terms of the popularity and something that resonated with the audience, a modern audience.
Yes,
well, they stayed true to the comics too with those movies, especially with Captain America. I mean, they stayed pretty true to the comics for the most part. And that's what really helped the success of those films.
Right, and the thing is about Captain America, he's still cool. Like people love Captain America. Like and it's funny. I was thinking the same thing, Glenn, and like about Captain America. And I hate to say it, but it just shows you how cool Marvel always was. They always had. It's just like they had those characters. It is sad, but something about the Marvel it's in the psyche now that it's just there were those ragtag superheroes, that
Mhm.
underdog guys, and they just had that magic, and that magic still, despite what they do with the heroes today, there's still that thing that
Yeah.
resonates with those heroes, that they just always seem a lot more hipper, a lot more with it, a lot more modern. And it's just something. The DC guys are more like of these symbols of like a time long ago, that they were those strong. And the Marvel character, I don't know, it's just because it's still so contemporary. Because if you just look at all the Marvel heroes, like all of them are like, even the lower tier guys, they're still cool, and they still got that. There's something about that. I don't know.
Yeah, but then again, John, and I'm sure Glenn will agree, 99.9%, except for Captain America, are extremely fallible. They get angry. They do some strange things. They have dark storylines where they're going down dark paths, and then they rise up to back to being a hero again.
Mm-hmm.
Superman doesn't do that because he's supposed to be immune to this outside experience, this toxic experience. So even if he's surrounded by, incredibly angry other heroes or whatever it is, or when the situation is so bad that like the universe is about to crack and people are saying, we've got to snap this baby's neck. Superman is the one that's going to be like, you know what? We have to stand by our guiding principles here, because if we do that, we've lost. Let's think of another way. That's what Glenn is getting into.
Yeah.
And, that might appear in a movie later on where, Superman's like, well, yeah, snap the baby's neck. But generally speaking, I just to ask a question here, if you guys were given a check and could write Superman, could you guys do it?
No, I couldn't have my name.
Niall,
No.
could you do it?
I think I could.
Oh,
Yeah, I would give a crack at it, because
I would totally.
I think I could, as a fan of Superman, being especially the first superhero that I fell in love with, and I still have the love for the character. I will say Batman is probably up a notch now from where Superman was, but it's, my list is Batman, Superman, right? I think I could do it.
I'll tell you something else. I would certainly want to give it a try, but as one of the very few Marvel editors who did get to edit Superman once, that's me. I would say that if I had trouble coming up with a story, I would do what I did when I edited that one Superman story that I edited, which is I get the best people to do it for me.
There you go.
So in ending here, let's put up Glenn's book again. Let's show everybody to go pick that up. That'll be on newsstands for how long? Those usually are on the newsstands for a little while, right?
It's going to be on the newsstands at least until June. And a lot of the times that they linger. If they're selling well enough, they go into second printings. And from what I understand, the reaction to this has been so good that I'm going to cross my fingers and hope that it goes into a second printing.
Yeah. Good. Yeah, it was. I got mine downstairs too. Always supporting, and it's great. We encourage everybody out there to pick it up, because I don't know what Steve was talking about with this series, but pick up that. I'm sure that's a lot. This is a lot better than what's going on today. That just blew my mind. So, Glenn, any last words on Superman? Give us something.
I just saw Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3.
Yeah.
And having it being the first Marvel Cinematic Universe movie that I've enjoyed in it seems like forever. I have reason to believe that Superman is in pretty good hands. I think that James Gunn may have the chops to give us the best Superman movie that we've seen in a very, very, very long time, with humor and heart and silliness when it's appropriate, and character. And so that I think that could go a long way to answer your original question. That could go a long way in terms of recapturing the public's imagination and showing people just how cool Superman can be. And maybe you'll see people graffitiing the S symbol on walls in your
Well,
neighborhood, and
the
so
one
forth.
thing about James Gunn, he resonates with people today. Like he's on the mark. Like he's hip. He just
Mhm.
gets these characters, whether he knows them through and through.
Yeah.
He just has that you can just. I said the same thing. DC was lucky to get him because Warner, because he's somebody they need to jumpstart it, that just has
Sure.
that right, that he just has the right feeling. And like,
Yeah.
once again, Guardians of the Galaxy, how you making a raccoon that was just such a throwaway character that
Have you
is
seen
now
Have you
gonna.
seen the movie?
Yeah,
I
yeah,
have.
yeah, yeah,
It's
I just saw it.
I mean, oh my God. I mean,
But but think of this.
yeah,
Rocket, what I remember, not just reading the Hulk comic, but that limited series. Remember that
sure.
Bill Mantlo?
Yeah,
Okay,
Mel
with
Nano and Mike
fighting
Mignola.
those clowns. If
Mhm.
you were to take me back in time, Steve knows that limited series. You go back in time and you're going to say this character right here is going to be one of the biggest Marvel characters in the world. You would
Right.
be like, Rocket Raccoon?
Right.
Get the hell out of here!
Just
Yeah,
very
but we
quickly.
have to be very careful when we talk about Guardians 3, in case we talk about what happened to Warlock, because then
All right,
I
take
have
it
to do
easy,
a
Steve. We'll save
I
that
have
for
to do
another
a
No
one.
spoilers, I
17-hour
haven't
dad
seen it.
tribe. I have to get these 2 knives and put them into my brain and do
Take
this.
it
But
easy.
what we'll do is we'll keep this nice and happy as we
On
fall
Superman.
down.
Go ahead, Glenn. Go ahead. Last word.
It wasn't perfect. It wasn't perfect, but it was very enjoyable. Yeah, I think that the rebirth of love and interest in Superman isn't necessarily going to come from the comics. I think the comics can benefit if it comes from one of the other mediums in which Superman appears. I think the best shot is the movies. You
Mhm.
make a great Superman movie, and that raises the profile to a significant degree, and the comics can benefit from it if you go to the store and you buy a comic book and it resembles the movie that everybody seems to love. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? If you go pick up the comic book and it bears no resemblance to what you just saw in the movies, that's a problem. But I think that there's a chance that a few years from now we will be talking about Superman and enjoying and basking in the fact that he's popular again.
Wow.
There's reason
Well
to hope.
said. Well said. And a character that is 85 years old, you can kick him and put him down, but it just takes one. He's strong enough. Like those main characters are always strong enough to come back.
Mhm.
You can degrade him. You can shove things up his butt, but you can't keep him down. All
I
right,
gotta look
Steve.
that up. I gotta look that
Yeah.
up. And
New
I
meaning
can't.
to Man of Steel.
I can't believe that.
Get us out of here, Steve. Up,
By the
up,
way,
get away.
Glenn, thank you so much. Thank you for those incisive comments. It's been a
Yep.
magnificent show. I really appreciate it.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
Boom!
Hey everyone, thank you for joining us on Pop XP. If you haven't already, make sure to click that subscribe button and also click the bell for notifications when we go live and we upload some awesome new content. Also, don't forget to head on over to Twitter and follow us at the Pop XP and over on Instagram at the Pop XP. Thanks again everyone, and we'll see you soon.